Hey guys, welcome back to our 2 weeks of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything Doctor Who for 2 straight weeks ahead of the 60th anniversary special. Today, we are continuing our series on ranking every Doctor Who episode on a tier list. This is our third episode today. We are on Doctor Who Series 3. Now, this is every season since the revival in 2005. Today, with Series 3, we are going to go over every episode from Series 3 that aired in 2007, including the 2006 Christmas special, The Runaway Bride, which I think fits best in Series 3 narratively, because we've lost Rose going forward from Series 2 into Series 3, and it just fits with the overall narrative going forward into Series 3. Just like you saw in the last episode, we put the Christmas invasion with Series 2 rather than Series 1, just because it makes more sense to do so. So let me pull up my rankings on here just so we have all of these matched, and we are going to start from the bottom with the worst episode in Doctor Who Series 3. For me, it's got to be the two-parter, Daleks in Manhattan and Evolution of the Daleks. Now, I'm actually going to put Evolution of the Daleks below Daleks in Manhattan for a very specific reason. And let me find Daleks in Manhattan here, this one. They're both not good episodes, first of all. You have kind of a fun supporting cast. Andrew Garfield is in there, first of all. This was one of his very first breakout international roles. But all in all, the supporting cast isn't great. There's not a ton of likable characters. You kind of fall for this romance with Tallulah and Laszlo. But this episode is really brought down by the CGI. Not just the CGI, but the makeup effects in general. The hybrid Daleks, especially in the second part of this episode, really drag the thing down. The writing in this episode isn't great. Basically, what this episode does is say that the Daleks are so desperate that they are going to revive their species by doing something that Daleks would never do, and that's combine themselves with another species in order to help them survive. That basically goes against everything that the Daleks are about, and I don't think the writing in this episode supports as grand of an idea as that is. The acting is fairly good in this episode. Like I said, I do like Andrew Garfield. I do like all of the Hooverville people, but all in all, the plot of this episode isn't great. The writing's not great. The special effects aren't great. For me, it's always been an F-tier episode. I've always been super bored by this two-parter. Let me know if you guys have any differing opinions. I'm sure you do, but for me, I think these two episodes are in this garbage F-tier. And that brings us up to the next worst episode, another special effects blunder. And this one we'll put in D tier, but this one is, of course, the Lazarus Experiment. Now, Doctor Who, especially early on, had always kind of had a sketchy relationship with special effects. We talked a little bit about that in the Series 1 tier ranking episode. Series 2, I thought, did very well with the werewolf creature. And then we took a huge step back here with the Lazarus Experiment. This is Mark Gatiss in prosthetics as an old man, and then he revives himself as a younger man. And this doctor who is so obsessed with making himself young again, making himself new again, basically corrupts his DNA and turns into a monster by the end of it. And this monster looks horrendous. It looked bad at the time. It looks horrible now. The plot of this episode isn't horrible. We get some really weird, creepy, old man preying on younger woman vibes with everything going on between Dr. Lazarus and Tish, that's Martha's sister. We get some family dynamic with Martha's family that we hadn't had before, which is nice. I do like the at-home stuff in Doctor Who, but all in all, this episode isn't great. The special effects really drag it down. It's not an episode, much like the Dalek two-parter, it's not an episode that I really want to revisit at any point. Next, we move up, and we are going to go all the way up here to Gridlock. Now, a lot of people love Gridlock, and I'm going to explain why Gridlock is a D-tier episode for me. It's not a special effects issue. It's more so a writing issue. I I think this episode has a lot of really heavy concepts. You have this idea that people have essentially been trapped underground in this like concealed highway for decades, and great world building. It expands upon New Earth that we saw in Series 2. We see great performances from all of the supporting cast. Great performances from Freema Agyeman and David Tennant as the Doctor, and Martha in that reverse order. The special effects are bad, especially with the macra, but that's not why I don't like this episode. It just feels like all of these heavy concepts about being trapped and about no hope. It's not written in a way that's very coherent for me. That's always been the perspective that I have. I know a lot of people think the opposite. They think it works really well. It's got super heavy concepts that are blended well, but to me, it's never felt like that. It's felt like a very kind of just jumbled together story. You have a lot of plot points that I don't think have ever really meshed very well together. I think the Face of Bo stuff at the end is cool, but I don't think it works very well with the overall narrative of this story. I think just the addition of all of the Face of Bo stuff at the end takes away from the rest of this episode, and I already don't like the rest of this episode to begin with. I think the inclusion of the macra is detrimental to this episode. I think this episode would have been better without an overarching villain. They had to add this horror element. I think it would have been a much better episode if there wasn't actually a danger at the bottom and they were just, it was just trapped people with the fear of the unknown. But they added the macra, and I think it was detrimental to it. I've never liked this episode. That's kind of just my personal opinion. Let me know what you think of Gridlock in the comments below. But for me, Gridlock is a D tier episode. Then we move up. Let's see here. Our next episode is going to be The Runaway Bride. This I'm going to put in C tier. Now, on first watch, I really hated this episode. I thought it was kind of a rehash of the Christmas Invasion a little bit. It's got a very similar feel to the previous year's Christmas special, although obviously we do have a new companion. It's a completely different plot line, but there are elements that are used again, such as like the killer snowmen, the pilot fish, that sort of thing. Donna is not a very likable character, especially on first watch. I really hated Donna in this role, and it was one of those, like, you hate her in this role, and then you find out she comes back in Series 4, and you really don't want to watch Series 4. But, spoiler alert here for Series 4, Donna is the best companion in New Who for sure. And going back and watching this, I have a newfound appreciation for her in this episode because it sets the groundwork for what she will eventually develop into, and then what we will eventually lose and revert back to. I think the plot of this episode is fun. I just don't think there are any really super heavy concepts that they wrestle with, besides, of course, the Doctor losing Rose. But to me, it doesn't affect the episode as much as it should have, if that makes any sense. I think it's mentioned, it's talked about, but I don't think we really see it as much as we need to. And all in all, like, the Racnoss is kind of funny on screen, like not recognized as well as I think it could have been on screen. The camera work with the Racnoss is really weird for me, and I think that was the effect they were going for, but I really just don't like it. It's not even a shaky cam. It's just kind of like this. If you know the episode, you know what I'm talking about, but very much like a continuous dolly shot in and out of this creature to replicate the movements. And I've never really cared for that. So I'm putting The Runaway Bride bottom of C tier. Next, we're going to go up to a controversial take for me. I know a lot of people love this episode. I don't. And that is going to be the finale. Nope, I lied to you. We're going to go 42 right above Runaway Bride. But we will come back to the finale. 42 is a very mid-tier episode. It's a Chris Chibnall episode. It was the first episode that Chris Chibnall wrote for Doctor Who. It centers around this concept of a 42-minute doomsday timer that has to do with the 42-minute runtime of the episode. The episode is basically told in real time. They're collapsing towards like this sentient sun, and in order to get to the other side of the ship to save the ship, they have to do all of this trivia. Chris Chibnall really likes timers. He really likes I shouldn't say mystery boxes, but he really likes limiting the characters. And it doesn't work very well in this episode, partly because I have always felt like a lot of elements in this episode are recycled from something like The Impossible Planet and The Satan Pit. It feels very similar. I think, like, atmospherically, it's very similar. I think danger-wise, like the dread is similar but different because this is more of a thriller type episode, whereas that one is more of a horror type episode. This episode is one of those, like, you watch it and it's very forgettable. And it tries really hard, but I couldn't tell you any of the characters' names. I could tell you that, like, the pilot is the bad guy. I couldn't tell you how many people are on this spaceship. I couldn't really tell you, like, all of the things that... I remember the burn with me quote. I remember the trivia elements. And that's about it, to be honest with you. And I've watched this episode several times. This isn't like it's been so far out of my memory. Like, I recently rewatched the entire series, and this episode still doesn't stand out to me. So I think it's solid C tier for me. Then we go to Sound of Drums, Last of the Time Lords. Now, I'm removing Utopia. It's a 3-parter. I'm removing Utopia because I think Utopia is an excellent episode, and we will get to it eventually. But we're going to put Sound of Drums above Last of the Time Lords here. Last of the Time Lords for me is really boring. It's just kind of this Martha story where she goes around the world telling people about the Doctor in order to save the Doctor. Nothing really happens until the end of this episode. This is like the exact opposite of what a finale usually is, where you have a ton of build-up in the first episode and then you have the payoff in the second episode. To me, the first half of this episode does a really good job of setting up the second part and building that tension that we need to have. But then the second half, I always feel really fumbles it. I don't like the Dobby Doctor. I don't like the whole Deus Ex Machina where they basically pray the Doctor back to life. I've never been a fan of anything that this second half of the episode does. The first half... Sorry, the second parter, I mean, and then the first parter, like, I think it's very tonally inconsistent. I'm not a huge fan of the John Sim Master. I know a lot of people are. I know that a lot of people love that they brought him back for Series 10. I've never really connected with the John Sim Master. I think he's way too campy, way too over the top. The tone of this episode with all of, like, the dread, especially at the end of the episode, goes completely against the tone that the Master brings into the episodes. We have good comedy bits, but those don't mesh well with the rest of the episode. So we have good elements in the first part of this 2-parter, but overall, like, this 2-parter has always fallen flat for me. I have always hated the end of Series 3. And that's why when I first watched Doctor Who, I thought that Series 3 was one of the weaker series in the entire show. And obviously, since revising this, I don't necessarily agree with that, but the sentiment is still there because of the fact that I think the series ends really poorly. So I always leave Series 3 with a bad taste in my mouth because I don't like the finale so much. Next, we are up to B tier, and we are going to go all the way to the Shakespeare Code. So of all of, like, the good, I guess, episodes in Series 3, I think this is the weakest. This is where I actually start to like the episodes in Series 3, which is why it's in B tier. But the Shakespeare Code, there's a lot to like about it. Very good world design, very good atmosphere to this episode. The realization of Shakespeare, I think, is very... I shouldn't say it's very accurate in my opinion, because I never knew the guy. But what we know about Shakespeare... this was realized in a very non-romanticized way, which I liked. That's one of the things we'll talk about when we get to Series 12 that I didn't like about Nikola Tesla. I think they over-romanticized him, and we'll talk about that more in Series 12. But I liked that in this episode with Shakespeare, they don't overly romanticize him. They make him a very realistic, very broken person. I think it works well. I think the witches are an interesting concept that has not been done better in other witch appearances in the show. I'm talking specifically the Witchfinders in series 11. Just this concept that magic in this world is really just extraterrestrial science that we don't understand. I like that element. I think it's really well realized. I think the elements between the Doctor and Martha are really well realized in this episode before they kind of fall flat in the rest of the series. This sets up a great adventure for the rest of the series, and I think they do it really, really well. The reason for me it's not any higher is I think the plot does kind of lull a little bit. I don't like the stuff when they go to Bedlam. I think that it's not tonally inconsistent, but I think they just added that scene or those series of scenes to kind of pad the runtime. I don't think it really adds anything. They do discover the secret of the Globe Theater, but I have always felt like the Bedlam scenes take away from the rest of the episode. I think the pacing is just slightly off when you add that element to it. Otherwise, a great episode of Doctor Who. It's just never super connected with me. That's why I think it's B tier. I like it, but it's not one of my favorites, if that makes any sense. And then from there, we will jump up to Smith and Jones. So this is the episode right beforehand. This is the season opener. We meet Martha Jones. I think this is a very cool concept episode where you basically take an entire landmark and put it somewhere else. I like that a lot. I think Martha is very well realized in this episode. I think the Doctor and her chemistry is great. Especially, the thing about Martha is a lot of people love her. She's a lot of people's favorite companion. She's never been mine. And that's to no fault of Freema Agyeman. I love Freema. I've always said Agyeman. It might be Agyeman, but I'll pronounce it with the hard G. I've always felt like Freema Agyeman was she's a great actress. I love her in Law and Order. But I've always felt like Martha Jones was a poorly written character, and not just in the perspective of she was supposed to follow up Rose and they did her dirty, blah blah blah, all the usual nonsense. She starts out really strong and she slowly loses her, how do I describe it, her independence as not independence, but the spark that she has as a person, as a written character at the start of series 3, I think really starts to lag. I think she becomes way too dependent on the Doctor, and I don't even know if that was intentional writing, because to me, it doesn't feel like a proper plot point the more they develop it, especially when you get to the end and she sacrifices herself for the sake of the entire world, essentially. And I know a lot of people love her. I know a lot of people love the fact that she was strong enough to leave the TARDIS at the end or whatever, but I have never felt like her story was very well written to portray that decision, if that makes any sense. And to no fault of Freema Agyeman, to no fault of any of the performances with her or her family, I've just never connected with Martha very well. All of that to say that her first episode is very good. If Martha stayed as strong as a character as she was in the first 2 episodes of this series, I would really like Martha Jones. I just don't feel that momentum is carried over. And so I put this one here. It's a fun romp. It's a little too, it's not quite cartoonish in a Partners in Crime way, the series opener in series 4 that we'll talk about next episode. But it's always felt like the stakes aren't as high as they should be for all of these people are going to die. We are going to suffocate on the moon. I have never felt the inherent danger in that, the way that some other episodes portray danger in the way that they do, especially in series 3. I like the Judoon. I like the Plasmavore as a villain, even if she is occasionally sometimes a little too over the top for me. But I do really like this as a series opener. I think it's easily top of B tier for me. Next, we move on. We are in the top 4 now. Do I have that right? Yes, because 13, we've ranked 10 episodes. There's 13 episodes in the series and the Christmas special. So 4 more left. In 4th place for me, let me just check my list here, is the only one that I have in A tier, and that is Utopia. Utopia is one of those episodes, I really don't like it until the final third. Does that make any sense? This is the Star Wars Rogue One of Doctor Who episodes. I don't love the atmosphere in this episode. I don't love the setup to this episode. I don't like the inclusion of Jack in this episode necessarily. However, everything that has to do with the last third of this episode is almost perfect. Like, almost perfect. And I don't just mean good. I think everything to do with Master Yana, his entire setup, I think everything to do with this concept of we are leaving Utopia, or we are leaving for Utopia, and all the hope that these people have, and this man willing to sacrifice himself, but then all of a sudden, like, the introduction of the Fob Watch and all of the things to do with the Time Lords and all this impending doom. I think this episode sets up the finale so perfectly that the fact they fumble it really, really bums me out. I think this is a great episode. I could watch the last 10 minutes of this episode on repeat and just get so hyped every single time I watch it. I love this episode, but like I said, the first half to about first 2/3 are just a little slow for me. I don't love it atmospherically, but I think everything develops itself super well by the last third, and the ending, the cliffhanger, is just one of the best cliffhangers Doctor Who's ever had. Now we move up to S tier. Now this is why Series 3 is excellent. Like, I'm always hesitant to say that Series 3 is great, just because, like I said, I leave it with a bad taste in my mouth. But these 3 episodes are some of the best in Doctor Who, and you might hate this, but I'm putting Blink in 3rd place. A lot of people think Blink is the best episode of Doctor Who. I don't disagree with that opinion necessarily. Well, I do. It's not my favorite episode of Doctor Who. I think that this is no fault of the episode's own, right? I think that this episode would be better had they never brought the Weeping Angels back. This episode has not aged well on me with time. It is still as scary, but like the threat isn't as great as it was the first time I watched it. This is an excellent episode of Doctor Who. It's one of Stephen Moffat's best pieces he's ever written. But for me, this sits at the bottom of S tier. Now, the great things about this episode, all of the timeline stuff, I think, to lack of a better phrase, the wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey ball stuff is so well written and so, like, concretely put together and built by itself that this episode works really, really well. I think Carey Mulligan as Sally Sparrow is a phenomenal addition to the cast, to the point where I wish they would have brought her back eventually. And I know I say that, and if it had actually happened, I probably wouldn't like the character as much. But what an excellent addition to the cast. I think all of the, like, secondary characters are very well realized. The acting is phenomenal. The stuff with Billy Shipton is great. The fact that he essentially dies on the same day that he meets this girl. All of the stuff with Kathy and her grandson coming, and the realization that, like, her timeline is secure as soon as that door opens. I think this is an excellently written episode. There are a few elements that I don't love about it. I don't love the ending montage. I don't like any of the stuff when the Doctor actually arrives at the end. I think that kind of takes away, like, it completes the loose thread of the Doctor knowing what's going to happen, but I think we see elements of Martha in a light that I don't like. I think we see elements of the Doctor that I don't like. It just feels like an afterthought scene. And I know that's kind of the point of the scene, and that's like a hypocritical take. But like the last 5 minutes of this episode, I don't care for. It might be less than 5. It might be the last 3 minutes or so, but I've never liked it after the plot is resolved. If that makes any sense. You might have completely different takes. Please tell me why you think Blink is the best episode in Doctor Who. Please tell me why you think Blink is way overrated and I shouldn't even have it in S tier. Let me know in the comments section below. But for me, genuinely, this is my favorite episode of Doctor Who. And I have gone back and forth between the two-parter and Heaven Sent. And I'm going to come back and re-rank them again once we combine all of the episodes together. But right now, the last time I ranked all of the Doctor Who episodes, Human Nature and Family of Blood are the best episodes of Doctor Who. I think the acting in this episode is some of the best acting we've ever seen. David Tennant is never better. I'm serious when I say that. David Tennant is never better on this show than he is when portraying John Smith. And actually, I'm going to flip these around. I like Family of Blood better than I do Human Nature. If for any reason, because the acting is better. I think, if you know anything about me on my Game of Thrones videos, Harry Lloyd is probably my favorite actor ever. He is phenomenal in Game of Thrones. He's phenomenal in this. I love Harry Lloyd. He's, of course, the one who plays Bane. He's son of mine. His performance is so creepy and just, unearthly that it adds this whole atmosphere and it feeds all of the other actors who are playing off of him. I think he carries this episode. I think David Tennant's acting at the end of his life as John Smith is phenomenal. Joan, is it Redfern? It is Redfern, because Redgrave is Gemma Redgrave, the actress who plays Kate Stewart. Nurse Redfern, I think her portrayal is great. The only portrayal that I don't necessarily love in this episode is Martha. I think Martha is almost underwritten in this episode. Not to any fault of Freema Agyeman, but I don't think she was given any, I don't think the response that Martha is supposed to have in this episode is quite delivered in the way that it should be to match everything else. But everything else in this episode is perfect. Pip Torrance as the headmaster, I think, does a great job. All of the supporting cast are great. The love story feels real. It feels genuine. This is one of Doctor Who's best tragedy stories. I think the writing in this episode is phenomenal. There are very few holes I can poke in it. And for me, as of me recording this, and I might change my mind by the time we get to Series 9, my favorite episode in all of Doctor Who is Human Nature and the Family of Blood. And with that, we will end this video. So here's where we sit. At number 14, sitting in F tier, 14 and 13 back to back, we have Evolution of the Daleks at the bottom and Daleks in Manhattan right above that. D tier, we move up. Number 12 is the Lazarus Experiment. Number 11, Gridlock. We move up to C tier. Number 10, The Runaway Bride. 42, Number 8, Last of the Time Lords. Number 6, The Sound of Drums. Then we move up to B tier. I say 6, I meant 8 and 7 is how you count backwards. Thank you. Number 6 is The Shakespeare Code in B tier. Number 5, Smith and Jones. We move up to A tier. Number 4 is Utopia. And then we move all the way up to S tier. Number 3, Blink. Number 2, Human Nature. And number 1, The Family of Blood. Let me know how you rank episodes in Doctor Who Series 3 down below. We will come back tomorrow with the Series 4 tier ranking episode. Check out all of our other Doctor Who content over my left shoulder, bottom right corner of your screen. But until next time, we will see you very, very soon.